We'll know when the takeover is complete, when RuPaul is like, I love Larry Ellison, because that's probably happening. They're going to get a script. So let's just wait for them to get a script and start, like, you know, talking about how great President Trump, whatever. I don't know. Like, that's what I envision happening, is they will try to either cut Drag Race or use it as a tool to parrot what they want to say.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Uncloseted with me, Spencer Macnaughton. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Miss Peppermint. She was a runner-up on RuPaul's Drag Race. She was the first trans contestant on the runaway hit, The Traitors. And now she is the Grand Marshal for this year's New York City Pride. Peppermint, thanks so much for speaking with me in Uncloseted Media today.
Hello, I'm so happy to finally be with you. This is great. Hello, Uncloseted.
Yes, we've done many collabs, and you've definitely amplified our work, and you're just such a huge advocate in the community, so we're thrilled to connect with you formally in this way. So you were recently named the Grand Marshal for New York City Pride. How did that come about, and what does that exactly mean? What is your duty if you're Grand Marshal?
You know, I'm still trying to figure it out, but don't tell them. You know, I mean, obviously, most parades and marches, probably all of them traditionally, have a grand marshal who's somebody's, you know, that they honor, who's like one of the people at the very front of the parade as it goes through. And so I'll be joined by some other fabulous grand marshals as well. I'm sharing the spotlight with Dominique Jackson, with Bernie Wagenblast, who New Yorkers will know as one of the voices of the subway system, and also Bowen Yang. And Gays Against Guns was just announced, and I'm so excited to share the spotlight with them.
Yes. And you wrote or you mentioned in a recent interview that you said being named a Grand Marshal for New York City Pride is deeply meaningful, not just as an artist, but as a Black trans woman standing in the legacy of those who fought for us to be here. That's, you know, Marsha P. Johnson, that's Sylvia Rivera. And, you know, through history, those voices, the voices of trans women of color, have, for many parts since 1969, been erased from that conversation, right? So how meaningful is that to you as a Black trans woman to be in this space now in 2026, especially given the political climate we're experiencing?
I am continuously dedicated to using whatever platform I have, whether it's before I was on TV, since I've been on TV, still using my platform to advocate for the LGBT community, including obviously trans folks. As someone who is trans, it does feel good to know that they are they, meaning the New York City Pride, they hold some reverence for the legacy of trans women of color, of trans people in general, and their contribution and to the legacy of Pride. The march is a sort of recreation of the very first time that the community you know, marched to commemorate what happened in 1969 at the Stonewall Uprising, where, you know, the police came to raid the bar, Stonewall, the legendary gay bar Stonewall in the Village, and, you know, the community fighting back. But I think what a lot of people didn't realize is that, you know, yes, trans people, trans women were there on the forefront, but it wasn't just an attack on the bar. This was an attack on sex workers, people who were homeless and on the street, many of which were femme, you know, presenting people, drag queens, trans women. You know, these were the street kids who were working, who were sometimes cast out of their apartment, you know, or left, you know, kicked out of their homes from their families. And the only places that they could gather were, besides the bar, were also, you know, like down at the pier and on the street, wherever. And some of them were engaging in survival sex work. And the police, the NYPD, were attacking, constantly harassing and throwing in jail and, you know, just like targeting, you know, trans sex workers, essentially. These were the people who were and are often the most vulnerable when it comes to interactions with the police. And those were the people who said, we are done. We are tired of it. That story has been whitewashed over time in many ways. One of the very first movies, one of the mainstream movies about Stonewall that we've seen, as a bunch of like blonde kids from Iowa as like the ones fighting back, when we know that it wasn't. Again, it was the street kids. It was the people who were vulnerable. And so their legacy had been erased. And so while we're hearing voices like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera being mentioned so much, especially in recent years,
Yeah.
is because it hadn't been included so much in the past. And it had been essentially erased. And it's been restored. And then since then, this administration has tried to erase trans folks from that legacy, taking down the mention of trans from the official website for the Stonewall National Monument, removing trans women, biology, gender, whatever, all these words from all federal government documents and websites. And so I know that was a long answer, but I think it was important for people to know that that's why it's important for me, and that's why it's so important to be included in Pride, because it feels like this year in 2026, the same year that the flag came down and went back up, thank goodness, it feels like it's a good time to remind people that trans folks are a very important part of the community.
100%. And when I hear you speak all that, like you are at the end of the day a very brave person, a very courageous person. You have Trump erasing all references to gender identity from all government documents, taking down the pride flag for what reason? And then his administration unveiled a new counterterrorism strategy that maybe you've seen that talks about, the biggest concern, which is not at all reflected in the evidence, is left-wing extremists and, pro-radical transgender people, whatever that means. I just interviewed two extremist experts for a different episode who talked about there's not even one mention of white supremacy, even though all of the evidence points to that being the biggest threat. So I want to know, you're an advocate, but you're also a Black trans woman, triple, quadruple jeopardy as it relates to who this administration's attacking. How does that make you feel going into this Pride Month as Grand Marshal?
It really just kind of solidified what I already knew. I guess the absence of white supremacist groups and organizations and white supremacy as a notion in terms of being a threat, domestic terrorism threat. It's like the weakest part of that evidence, because the biggest part of it was when they removed the proof that the federal government had that stated in multiple reports that white supremacy was the largest domestic terrorism threat in the United States since.
And just so the listeners know, the Department of Homeland Security quietly removed that threat from documents, so the public would not be privy to it.
So the absence is just an echo of that, right? Like their action of removing that is what really was like, what? I clutched my pearls. So this latest sort of act is just sort of confirmation of that. And it is terrifying. I want to leave the country.
You want to leave the country? You do?
Yeah, part of me wants, of course. I want to continue to use my platform to advocate for what I feel is right. And, part of me wants to leave. Part of me wants to stay and fight. And I think, what is this country that I'm want to fight for? I envision, am I going to stay and fight and want to risk my life for a bunch of other people that are just like, oh, well, that's what happened to the trans people? Or are we all going to fight? I can't just fight by myself. We have to fight for, each other. Sometimes when we see, not only the government putting out documents, official documents on government letterhead that say we're going to name trans people as terrorists, but then at the end it's saying we will find you and we will kill you. That's the part that's like, well, do I need to wait for them to kill me?
And just to be clear to the people who haven't read this document, that is a verbatim quote. They essentially list the terror threats, which include, quote, pro-transgender radicals. And then they say, make no mistake, quote, we will find you and we will kill you. I mean, that's insane.
That's in the document.
That's in the document. You mentioned you can't do this alone. What if people are listening to this and they aren't trans but are concerned and are seeing the stats? What can they do? What can we do to really be there for our trans siblings?
When I say I don't want to do it alone, it's not so much I need you to defend me, which would be nice. It's more that I need you to defend yourself by defending me. is what I want people to know. Like the cis community, people who are cisgender, people who are not trans, and also people who are outside of the queer community need to know that if rights are what we have, if rights are what equal rights are what a democracy gives you and what you have, an attack on those and removal of those rights for who someone is, who they love, or their political beliefs, then it is an attack on that very democracy and an attack on the people of that democracy and the people who value those rights. And so, going after people for who they are and removing their passports, naming them as terrorists, threatening to kill them, banning them from all types of government buildings and bathrooms and holding a job and healthcare, all these things. If they can, and only way they can do that to me is if they change the rules to make it possible to do. Now we have a government that can remove people from all these things. So now that means all they have to do is include, let's include Mormons as terrorists. You know what? I mean, it took them how long to put out this document? Vegans, whatever. I don't know. Like, they can target anyone. It sounds absurd and preposterous because it is. But it won't take long for them to widen that group to who they want to focus on next.
And I know you've been outspoken in all different places, including mainstream media. You've gone on CNN, a few times. I've seen you on there. And I worked in mainstream media, 60 Minutes, The Wall Street Journal. And a big reason I left was because I didn't feel like the coverage was rigorous enough, was fair enough, was frequent enough. How do you think the mainstream media is doing characterizing the issues plaguing the trans and LGBTQ community right now?
What is this question? They get an F for
They get an F.
They get a terrible F because
Tell me why.
It's so wild. We know that they're interested because they talk about it on the daily. Like every other day there's mentions of trans people in some way, shape, or form, and queer people in general. And so like they're constantly evoking us, talking about us, blaming us, bringing us up, attaching us, associating us to, constantly. It is wild that they have so much to say about us and they don't want to talk to us in general, the mainstream media. They don't want to include us. They don't want to hear. And, I wonder why that is, because with many other situations, they would want to go to sort of like the subject and speak with them about like what it is or who the people who are involved in the story. You want to get their side of the story. Except when it's a situation like this, when it's the political scapegoat. When it's a political scapegoat, it actually is imperative that you don't hear from them, that you just hear about them, because then you can create who they are for other people to sign off on.
I have a friend, Elena Kupek, and she's a trans military veteran, and she went on Abby Phillips' CNN News Night, the 10 p.m. slot, after Trump passed the trans military ban. She was the only trans person on the panel. Other panelists include Scott Jennings, who is a Trump loyalist, who has zero expertise in trans issues, but it created this false equivalency debate between Elena, who was a military person and is trans, and Scott Jennings, as though both of those opinions should be considered equal from a journalistic perspective. How damaging are those kinds of conversations that are airing on shows like Abby Phillips that are, sure, we say Americans don't talk, but they talk here, but the majority of Americans perceive that as news still?
Yeah, it's not news. It's obviously just entertainment. And, I really was upset I was really grateful to be on the show and have appeared there with another trans person. Particularly, I got a chance to go on there with
on Abby's show.
On Abby's show, pardon me, yes. And but I do think that CNN has always served to launder, the reputation, to launder the impact and soften the perception of the very, very, very real impact that sort of centrist politics that CNN holds. It really just exists to protect sort of like capital and protect big business and sort of corporate, the corporate flow of politics that controls policy. And so I'm not surprised. But I think you're 100% right. There is an epidemic, a habit, a vibe that this country has to just like take somebody off the street who has no knowledge about anything at all other than their own opinion when they hear something. And that opinion when they hear, like, what do you think of this concept that you've never heard of, but we're going to give it to you and tell us what you think. And then here's an expert in that, go. And then suddenly the Scott Jennings gets to have an opinion on what I'm doing with my body or what rights I have. And that thinks it's harmful. It's damaging and harmful.
And I don't want to single out, Abby's show too much because this happens on many different shows across network news. But to hosts like Abby or to producers on these shows, and I've worked in these newsrooms who really care and really want to do it right, but might hit blocks. What's your advice as a trans woman who's experiencing this? What's your advice to them, the people who are actually shaping the news packages we're watching, and actually do have some agency in deciding what gets to air?
My ask is bring trans people on at least to talk about the trans issues that you mentioned every day. But besides that, bring trans people on to talk about what's going on with Medicare. Bring trans people on to talk about what's going on with the war, whatever. Like, bring trans people on to talk about more because those things impact us as well. And so, for the simplest thing is, gender affirming care and issues of gender affirming care, the government telling people that what decisions they can make medically with their own body ties directly with reproductive justice and access to abortion and making your own medical decisions for your body. That's something that we can all talk about. That is an intersection that you could bring a trans person on to talk about. So I would ask of those other creators, bring trans people on to talk about everything that you want to talk about. Honey, we got lots to say and we can add something to the conversation because we have a very unique perspective. And then beyond that, my advice to CNN is you would want to follow what the other podcasters will be doing and having them on because you will be feeling your own demise and become a lot less relevant than you already are if you don't.
All very, I'm the least surprising thing from this interview is that you're very interesting. I want to stick on media though for a second because right now you must know that the Ellisons billionaires own Paramount, right? And they brought who are MAGA loyalists, and they have really reshaped the narrative at CBS News, bringing in Barry Weiss, who's an opinion columnist. But Paramount also owns MTV, which airs RuPaul's Drag Race, which you were a finalist on. Ru and the show have been a groundbreaking TV series as the most successful Emmy Award-winning reality TV series of all time. They have been progressive trailblazers for many different reasons. Right. Yeah, for many different reasons, though, for LGBTQ rights. There's been no messaging on the fact that Paramount's owned by the Ellisons. Should there be? Should they stay with Paramount? What are your thoughts on that?
It would be a wonderful to see anyone on that show speak out against sort of what is happening in our country with regards to the control over politics and policy and the intersection, again, of money with politics, especially as related to the Ellisons and the purchase of Paramount. We'll know when the takeover is complete, when RuPaul is like, I love Larry Ellison, because that's probably happening. They're going to get a script. So let's just wait for them to get a script and start talking about how great President Trump, whatever. I don't know. Like, that's what I envision happening is they will try to either cut Drag Race or use it as a tool to parrot what they want to say. I hope that doesn't happen, but it's either one or the other. They're either going to get rid of the show, but it's such a ratings juggernaut that I imagine they'll probably try to reshape Drag Race and take out any political messaging.
That's what I think about, though. Ru has so much money; she doesn't need any more money, right? And the show is such a ratings juggernaut. They could go somewhere else. They have enough power from a ratings perspective that they don't have to be with Paramount. They're enough of a product there that they could dip out. Do you think they should dip out, given the political climate?
I don't know. I guess I have mixed feelings on it. I certainly see a world where Paramount, CNN all these different, anything under this new umbrella is going to have to follow what their owner and boss wants. Every show, every network that's been sort of sucked into the umbrella is going to have to fall in line. That's what fascism is about. You follow directions, and so I think that's in the future for the show if they don't leave. If they don't leave, then that it's probably going to just they'll either be disbanded or they'll be sort of we'll wake up one day and there's going to be this weird messaging coming out of Drag Race and be like, where's the lip sync? Suddenly they're like forcing us to say the Pledge of Allegiance, but with Donald Trump's name in it. Like that's what's going to happen. That's what happens in fascism. Do I think they should? I think I don't want to see a RuPaul's Drag Race that's like, teaching us how to march in a certain way. So I don't know, because by that point it won't even matter. Honestly. But I think they could. I think if they could just go online and start doing it on YouTube or whatever, I think they could do that. But I think ultimately no linear traditional television is safe. They own most of it.
Well, and yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I think, you know this from being on camera. I know this from being behind the scenes that, there's always little things that the viewer might not realize happen. And I wonder over at Paramount, while they're, putting together All Stars or, the next season, whatever it is, the little decisions that could be being made in the final script. And I think that there might be a lot of silent things to the next season that we don't realize have been edited out to appease the big bosses who are MAGA loyalists. And those are just the things we'll never know.
We'll never know. And I would be so surprised if it would be smart of them to just leave Drag Race alone. Drag Race is a wonderful thing because it features wonderful drag entertainers. That's what's so great about Drag Race, in my opinion. But I don't rely on Drag Race to get my political anything. And so
I hear you. let's so no, it's a fascinating conversation with about media. I could talk about it forever, but also want to talk, we're going into Pride 2026, right? And we are now 6 years after, the explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement after, George Floyd's murder that, spawned into a sub-movement, the Black Trans Lives Matter movement. And I'm curious, a lot of that had faded, at least from national, international conversations, right? Where do you think we are now?
I think we are in a state of emergency, for sure. I think this administration has been successful. That's where I think we are. It's like a wild wild west. Do I think we need another moment? I mean, hopefully not, considering that what galvanized people was the death of an unarmed Black man. No, I don't want that to happen, but it continues to happen on the daily, and that we're not marching in the street about it, means that the sort of news cycle focuses on it. And I'm grateful to see that people were able to become temporarily activated. And so I think we benefited from that. But I do think that it allowed people to sort of revert or sort of jump to this automatic sort of social media style performative advocacy or reaction, which I think is a natural human response maybe in this situation. So by that matter, people posting a black square and thinking that they've done their part, fine. Obviously it wasn't enough. What I would like to see is, instead of another sort of mainstream BLM moment, is an awareness that yes, racism exists. Yes, transphobia exists. Yes, we have to fight those things, but also organizing and at the community level, connecting in sort of a mutual aid way, so that we can't say, oh my girl, I can't go out and protest because I'll lose my job and I won't be able to pay my rent. Well, if we can make a way for your rent to be paid, you can go out and protest whether you lose your job or not. And then you don't care, and you're more likely to challenge the system. Mm-hmm. And so that is where I want people's minds to go, because it's going to be necessary to withstand whatever's coming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to be respectful of your time, but I
That
do
was a
have. I
long
want
answer.
to. No, that was a great. But it was an important answer. So thank you. And I think out of all the people we collaborate with, there's a lot of people who want to amplify our work, but you really are at the top of the list for people who are like, I don't care if this post hasn't popped or isn't going to get me more followers, or I just want to do this. And I can tell your advocacy is absolutely authentic and selfless. How did you get here?
That's a good question. I wonder. I sit around asking myself, why am I doing, like, what in the world? But I'm just like driven to it, and it's something that I would be doing whether I'm alone, whether I'm with people, whether there's a benefit of it or not. It's not something that I've seen that people can do to like make money or things like that. Most of what I do now is advocacy, and all of it is unpaid. And I do it because I care about it, and I will continue to do it. But it also means that like I'm extremely vulnerable to not being able to survive, because I'm not spending my time doing the things that it's necessary to do to survive. I just want to make sure that we're able to live and have basic rights, which means, advocacy. And I think it definitely started a long time ago. And it evolves over time. I think I got it from my grandmother. She was heavily involved in civil rights. And so that's probably where it came from. I don't know if it's genetic or if it was just like instilled as I was like watching, but it's here now.
And you used and when you got celebrity from RuPaul's Drag Race and other things like that, how did that affect it? Because the celebrity status would have made you in a whole different ballgame with it, I would imagine.
Yeah, I remember thinking, when I got on RuPaul's Drag Race, I was basically, yes, my platform sort of multiplied and sort of exploded tenfold, which I'm grateful for. And I remember thinking, well, I'm basically, for really honestly, doing exactly what I've always been doing the entire time, just on a larger scale. I believe I'm quite the family-friendly entertainer and personality. But I'm sure that there's people that have been like, let's not hire her because she might say the wrong thing. And so like, I'm sure that I've suffered that. But it doesn't change, if I lose every follower I have, I'm still going to be doing the same thing. I'll just be back to where I was before I just started this stuff. And so, that's kind of my thought on it.
I love it. And I feel like that is a beautiful place to stop. I could talk to you for a long time, but Peppermint, so grateful that you've given us your time. Thank you so much for speaking with me and Uncloseted Media today. This has been a really rich conversation.
Absolutely. I do want to remind people to tune in to the last job I held, which was Survival of the Thickest on July 2nd, right after New York City Pride.
Absolutely. We can plug that also in the show notes. So yes, thank you again, Peppermint. This was fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you.
And if you want to get every episode of Uncloseted with me, Spencer Macnaughton, subscribe to Uncloseted Media's YouTube page or listen wherever you get your podcasts.